This is A Line Around Your Thoughts, a podcast that centers on conversations with artists, writers, and creatives from around the inland Northwest. I'm EJ Iannelli, and my guest in the Rogue Heart Media studio for this episode is Bryan Harnetiaux, the Spokane Civic Theatre's playwright in residence since, is it 1982?
Correct.
Wow. So yeah, over 40 years. We're at 43 now?
Yes.
And Bryan, welcome, by the way.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And the last time we talked, I think it was in like 2022 or something, and I've actually, ever since, hoped that we could come back into a room and revisit aspects of that conversation, because I always thought that it would be nice if folks were kind of a fly on the wall for some of the things that we talked about there. And we covered your career as a bit of a retrospective, and then we maybe spun off into some other topics. But just the fact that you have been so embedded in the Spokane theater community for so long. You've been able to see it evolve. You've been able to see good aspects, bad aspects. You've been able to see theaters rise and fall. So you've got a really incredible perspective about just, everything to do with live theater here in Spokane.
Well, I feel like I've endured, but largely because the Civic has endured. And there has been a lot of ebb and flow over the years. I mean, this is a tough town for theater. Mm-hmm. I think everybody acknowledges that, although I think it's much better place now than it's been in a long time.
And when you say it's a tough town for theater, clarify that statement, because musicals seem to thrive here, as well as any other thing.
Well, and I guess what I'm really talking about is new plays, adventurous theater. I think for the longest time, Spokane stuck pretty close to the tried and true and what was safe, and mainly to get seats filled. Mm-hmm. But about half the year, it's such a great outdoors town that you're competing with just everything else that's going on in the entertainment world. But it's none of the, I would say and for the same way, look at Whitworth and Gonzaga University. Their theater programs have struggled for quite a long time, and I'm glad to see both of them are firing back up. But I don't think it's just in amateur or professional. Maybe it's something in the water. Who knows? But I do think it's getting better. But there's been a lot of turnover, and if you look at it, I mean, the Civic's been here 77 years, and we had a couple theater companies for a long time, and I'm sure Troy can speak to this. It's just tough, especially when you're unable to really pay your actors and your professional staff in any meaningful, competitive way. People are doing this for the love of the game. And we do, for example, the Civic really has a great foundation, and they've got a lot of benefactors now, and that keeps the doors open, and they're putting out a good work product, but they have a sizable professional staff now, and have had for quite a while. So they've invested seriously in the community and maintaining that theater.
And when you talk about Spokane wanting to play it safe and having done so for quite a while, you were kind of instrumental in getting it not to play so safe back in the 70s with the studio space. And you got them to kind of open that up as an experimental playground to some extent.
That was a basement. That was a storage room. And thank goodness Betty Tomlinson was willing to look at opening that space up, and it was nothing fancy. I remember one of the earliest critics was a Jesuit from Gonzaga named Mike Siganolfi, and he was a tough critic, and he was tough on everybody, including what he called the studio center's penitential seats. And those were the seats in there for about 15 years before they discovered cushions. So and that was considered experimental. My first play was done there in 77, a one act, and there were other original works done, but it was also a little more offbeat theater. The only other people in town who were doing really cutting edge, if you will, work were Bob and Joan Welsh out at Fort Wright College. when it had a functioning theater program. And of course, that eventually morphed into Interplayers. When Fort Wright closed down, Bob and Joan stuck their neck out even farther and set up a professional theater company that lasted in one form or another for 30 years.
Yeah, and then then we run into the issue with Spokane being able to support professional theater, and
right, and that created some tension with the amateur community, because as a theater professional company, albeit one of the lower echelons, I don't even think it was Lord B, but it had some special designation that allowed them to kind of cabin scripts in advance, because they were paying higher royalties as a professional company based upon gross receipts. And so they could tie up a script for years and we couldn't get at it. We being the Civic and some of the other amateur companies that were around. So, and so yes, there was a theater community, but there was also some underlying tension and competition between those companies.
And of course, though, they were able to tie up existing plays, but you have a vested interest in new works, and specifically in the studio theater at the Civic. Now, can you walk me through some of those early days in the 70s when you were kind of trying it out as an experimental play?
There were a couple of plays that were really pretty remarkable for Spokane. Probably one of the first was a play that had just tore Seattle up, called Angry Housewives. It was a musical, and it came out of Pioneer Square. And we got permission to do it about 5 or 10 years into the process, and did a fine job. But and Patrick Treadway played the lead kind of MC a la Cabaret, and his name in the play was Lewd Fingers, if that tells you anything. Then we did a production of another play that I had seen in Seattle, one of the first plays that really dealt with gender issues, and it was a breakthrough play called Bent, which was about inmates in Germany in World War II, and in a concentration camp, and there were gay lovers, and it was a love story in these wretched, horrible conditions at a time where they were vilified, and it was a tremendous production. I think Troy was involved in that production, as I recall.
Yeah, and I feel like Spokane gets a bad rap for being a bit too staid and a bit too conservative. Mm-hmm. But then you hear about plays like this, and they were pushing the envelope in many regards.
Yeah. We're in the mid-'80s by now.
Yeah.
And the festival started around there. The festival has been around a total, this is its 35th year, and that's original works, short plays, 30 minutes or less. But there was an 8-year interregnum where the festival was in hiatus. And that's why it's not called the annual festival, because we had at one point, for financial distress reasons and also artistic reasons, the executive director at the time felt that the festival had to be put on hold in order to just keep the doors open and do more commercial work downstairs, even in the summer. And part of that was the theater school that was starting to flourish and be revenue producing. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, even internally, there's been a struggle to keep the studio mission intact. But I think it's done that.
Well, since you brought up the Playwrights Forum Festival, it's probably a good time to springboard into that. And so this year it's celebrating its 35th year?
Yes.
Okay. And you've got, I think, about
11 competitive plays. And then I'm fortunate enough to be able to offer a play as a non-competitive entry as the playwright in residence there. And I've done that for many years now, and it's a wonderful opportunity.
And talk about how this got its start.
And it's funny, the world has changed for plays. And we still allow plays up to 30 minutes. And in the old days I'm talking about mid-20th century, a one act was considered 45 minutes or less. A full-length play usually had an intermission. I mean, if you go back to the 40s, there were 3 acts and maybe 2 intermissions, and then it went to 1 intermission. Well, the same thing has happened with shorter pieces. The really start of the festival movement occurred in Louisville with John Jory's Louisville Theater 10-minute play festival. That has changed the world. And now if you look at, there's a service called Play Submissions Helper that for a modest sum you can track every festival in the world right now, really. And so many of them are 10-minute festivals. You rarely see one that allows anything more than that. So the culture has changed so much. That's why in the old days in the festival, we might do 5 plays that were 30 minutes each. Well, now we're doing 11 only because most of those are short plays. And that is become a very legitimate art form. And it's amazing what you can accomplish with your craft in 10 minutes if you do it right.
But it's always been a one-actor.
It has.
Yeah.
Yes.
And why did you decide on the one act instead of doing full-length plays?
Excuse me. I think we wanted to encourage new writers. The focus was to try to bring new works. And most playwrights, not all, but most playwrights start with smaller works and cut their teeth on them. And that was kind of the idea. And then we were hoping to focus. We had at that time a Northwest preference, but for the first 10 years, pre-COVID, all the way up to pre-COVID, the festival was a national festival. We took, and it was really amazing how many people were willing to file a submission in Spokane, Washington, sight unseen, from New York, because they couldn't get done in New York. We had a number of East Coast playwrights who had really worthy pieces that were selected for our festival, who came out, and we put them up as we could in patrons' homes, and it was really energizing. And we often had playwrights gatherings and tried to take advantage of those moments and learn from them too. Some of these were new playwrights, but some were established playwrights. And there just wasn't that many venues. And that helped give the festival some early legitimacy when we were, and yet we always had a Northwest preference, the 5 same states that we now limit the festival to, and we've added British Columbia and one other province. But at that time, there were Seattle, Portland, Spokane playwrights, and some of them, it was the first time they'd ever been produced. There was a need. To go back from Louisville, Seattle, I'm not sure which theater started it, but I attended a short play festival in Seattle in the early 80s. Found it very energizing and brought that idea back to the Studio Center Committee.
And did it find a receptive audience when you brought it back to brought this idea to Spokane?
Well, in the theater, it did. It took a while for the festival to build up an audience. I mean, there were some early years where it was mainly family and friends. I mean, the studio was at best a 99-seat house. But in time, it became very popular.
And you have always had, as playwright in residence, you have always had a non-competitive entry?
Not every year. I mean, there might have been a couple of years where we just had other plays to fit the bill, or I didn't have anything. It is not something that has to happen, but it's something that's offered to me. And in the more recent years, I've wanted to take advantage of it. I'm one of those playwrights who likes to write under deadline.
Yeah, it's nice to have that fire lit under you. Yeah. So I would love to talk about maybe some of the plays that are coming up and kind of give folks a preview of what's in store.
And I would encourage people to take a look at the website because there are, for audition purposes, there's a synopsis, a brief synopsis of each and every play, and what the play calls for in terms of actors. It really runs the gamut. For example, one is set the day after Pearl Harbor in Seattle, in a tavern when the city was mustering for its first blackout that night for fear of being invaded by the Japanese.
Oh, and which one is that?
Blackout by Lee Lowing from Bainbridge Island.
That title makes sense. That tracks.
Yeah.
But I see you've got a number of Spokane, so homegrown entries as
Yes.
well. You've got Paul Lewis doing Brain by Committee by Abby Burlingame, and Pam Kingsley's there with A. Lee. You've got Molly Allen and Stephen Wiley doing Goodbye Cecile. So it's quite a few homegrown plays and playwrights.
And we have a Spokane Youth Division playwright.
Right, and that's something I wanted to talk about as
We've
well.
always had a youth division, and I think part of the problem these days is kids are so focused on film, and the theater programs, at least in this area, there are some great ones, but there are others that really aren't that active. And so I don't think kids are getting many opportunities to write for the stage. Mm-hmm. And we've really tried to push. Last year, Gene Hardy and I went to 7 different libraries and held workshops to encourage kids to come in. And we got great support from Sharma Shields, the writer in residence for the public library. And yet the turnout was pretty low. Mm-hmm. But this year we got more submissions for youth division than we've had in a long time. Yeah. I'm very happy to have this play in the festival.
And I can understand why there might be some apprehension or even lack of interest on the part of some teenagers and youths, because writing for the stage seems like such an alien concept. I mean, to me, I guess as a teenager, I was aware of the world of theater, interested in the world of theater, but maybe the world of film seems a little sexier and a little more approachable sometimes.
And a little more accessible with the magic of what you can do with a simple phone these days.
Yeah.
And put it out there for viewing and get, thousands upon thousands of looks. Theater is kind of cumbersome in comparison. I mean, it's collaborative. It has a lot of moving parts. You need, we're not talking about virtual space. Although we did learn quite a bit during COVID when there were a lot of Zoom productions. But nonetheless, theater demands a lot to get the job done. And without proper guidance and opportunities, I think that's hard for youth to dig in on that and make it work.
And it's Terminal Turmoil, that's the youth entry.
Yes.
So can you give us a little taster of that?
Yes, it's a comedy that takes place in a hospital room as the principal character is dying and is descended upon relatives. Some he's glad to see and some he's not. And of course he, with an eye toward his estate. So it's rollicking fun. And I think, as an opening play, to write a play with 8 separate characters, and it's about a 20-minute play. It's going to be directed by Jerry Shario, who I think has done a lot of theater and original works throughout his life. It'll be in good hands, and I really think that Playwright ought to get a good look at it.
And so what other directors do you have coming in? I think Sarah Edlin Marlowe is going to be directing one.
Yes, Tom Armitage. Let me see who else. Karen Brathroad, directors from both Gonzaga and Whitworth's theater program, who are fairly new to the community. And let's see, I'm not running across the list of directors right now, and they'll hate me. Jamie Flannery is directing. we want directors in the festival. It's not a place for directors to cut their teeth. We want the director, hopefully, to have experience with new works so that they can help guide the playwright and make that initial outing less traumatic.
But they're seasoned, but they are able to exercise different creative muscles on this. This is a very different animal or a very different beast to a full-blown production.
Absolutely. It's what we call a bare bones production. And if you look, we finally, the theater in the last few years has really done a marvelous job in describing the festival on its website and its benefits, its limitations, so that playwrights don't have any false expectations as they submit. And I think it's working very well. And for example, you have a handful of props and a few set pieces, and that's it. There's a lot of the plays that might be done with just a few chairs or blocks, black square boxes. It's kind of, when you think about Godot, all Godot required was a tree by the road. And so we try to keep it simple and encourage them to save that more elaborate stuff for later on and just tell a story as simply as you can.
Yeah, and all the titles are intriguing in their own way, and I think maybe that's a hallmark, certainly, of shorter plays. There's a little more zing to the titles. But
did you have any? Go ahead. Which one were you?
Well, I was looking at Sex in the Middle Ages. I was maybe because there's sex in the title. Sex in the Middle Ages. What is this play about?
Oh, my God.
Certainly, it's not solely about sex in the Middle Ages.
No, and in fact, it's a play on words, and it's a very good play on words. And this is by a seasoned playwright who won the festival last year with her play Ask Tell, which has been done at a number of other festivals. Barbara Lindsay from Shoreline. How do I describe this play? You can read it, folks, online, but it is about a couple in middle life after a 30-year marriage, learning about each other and aspects of their sex life that they really hadn't discussed in all those years. It's set in the 80s, and I think that's done for a reason. I mean, I think that was a time when things were still on the cusp, and there, a lot of sex education was not at our fingertips, so to speak, on the web. But this is a charming comedy about a couple dealing with sex in their midlife and the uncomfortable aspects of it and the comfortable aspects. It's not, and it's done with such care and humor that even though it might jar some in the early innings, stick with it, is what I would say. And this is a new play, and that's the other thing about the festival. I mean, the collaborative process includes built-in talkbacks, hopefully with the playwrights present. We really encourage them to come over. After every slate of plays, there's a moderated discussion where the audience gets to have its say. I mean, even at that, audiences don't tend to get too brutal. But if something isn't working, we encourage them. The way we set up the discussions is, all right, the playwright has had their say. We're going to keep them quiet. Now it's your turn. What did you like, dislike? Did you get confused at any point? Were you bored? Tell us. The plays are built brick by brick and usually through a number of productions. It just doesn't come out full blown all at once. And that's why we workshop. These plays are basically workshopped. And it's a great opportunity for the audience. And we encourage them, if you don't want to speak now, send an email. Tell us what you think. We'll get it to the playwright. And I think there's been times when there's been moments of true illumination where the playwright got it. Mm-hmm. But it took an audience to really drive it home. When all of a sudden there was a rustling of papers, or an inappropriate laugh, or only a modest applause. I mean, those things will bring you to your senses. We playwrights, we have to live on our illusions for so long, and then we get to see whether we were anywhere close to reality. And sometimes it can be brutal.
Yeah.
But it's a safe place to fail. You know,
what a
you
great
need a safe
tagline.
place to fail, and it's a safe place to win too. I mean, these plays, they go through quite a vetting. We just don't throw anything on the table here. These are plays by an anonymous committee that has looked over them and diligently and discussed them, and finally worked out a slate of plays that they feel confident in standing behind, and putting the name of Spokane Civic Theatre on them. It's a sacred process.
And before we get into your submission, which is the note, the one other title that, well, there were, like as I mentioned, there were several titles that caught my eye, but the other one that I found a little intriguing was Brain by Committee, and that's Abby Burlingame's submission.
Yes.
So tell us about Brain by Committee.
The protagonist in the play is a young woman who is in a workplace who is really interested in striking up a relationship with a coworker, but is having a hard time breaking the ice. And so in her mind are all these different forces, everyone from her mother to a total stranger, who are trying to give her advice on how to do this. It's that chaotic kind of, as you try to find some strategy, whatever the issue is, and you have all these different voices. She does a great job of, without, you have to let the audience discover what's happening. It doesn't say, now we're going to hear a bunch of people talk like they're inside this person's head. No, you come to realize that fairly quickly in the play, and then you understand the struggle that's going on, the turmoil in her own brain as she tries to come up with a strategy to enter a relationship with this other person.
And so it's all these voices that are made manifest.
Yes.
Okay.
And some of them are, some iconic movie star that she revers, and her mom, and her therapist, and her friends. And every one of them, the nice thing is every voice is distinct in its own right. Even though they're not labeled as, they're not wearing labels saying, I'm the mom. No, you discover it's the mom. So that takes a certain amount of deftness to pull that off. I think it's going to be very entertaining by a young woman who I think is 19 or 20.
Oh, wow. And a lot of these seem like they would lend themselves to comedy, and the form seems to lend itself to comedy. But there are some more dramatic ones in here. Like I'm assuming the Blackout would be a little more dramatic.
Yes. Tiwaki. I don't know whether you're familiar with that acronym, but it's the end of the world as we know it, Tiwaki, and that is after a post-apocalyptic event, a voice in the wilderness calling out when the earth has been devastated, and it's a fascinating piece.
And is that Blackout is the one that follows the Pearl Harbor?
Yes.
Okay, and then which one were you talking about just now?
Tiwaki.
Oh, right, Tiwaki. Okay, now I see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are probably 50-50 in terms of dramas versus comedies, and a few that are in both lanes.
And your contribution is the note.
Yes.
Is this serious or comedic?
I hope it's comedic.
I guess that remains to be seen with the workshop component.
Yes. My intention is, I owe my wife a comedy, see, because I've written a lot of dark stuff in my life, and she keeps saying, where's my comedy? And I'm not sure this will pay the bill, but it's a start.
Can you give us any idea what it's about without spoiling it too much?
As soon as I figure it out, I'll let you know. No, I don't want to be glib here. It's in a park. The principal character, Smitty, is working his phone, cutting through the park, and he collides with another person. And just abruptly and unexpectedly, and is shaken by this and discovers that there is a white piece of paper at his feet. And he picks that up, hence the title, The Note, and it goes from there. And he discovers that there was one other person in the park, a woman laying on the bench, sleeping, and it goes off from there.
And so this is going to run over 2 days in 4 days in 2 rotations.
Yes, with each play being seen 3 times. There was a total of 6 performances, including matinees, for those who don't like to go out at night, although it's getting pretty nice at night. The plays themselves are about an hour and a half, total hour 45, with a 15-minute intermission, and then there'll be a 30-minute talk back, 30 or 40. So if the curtain's at 7:30, you're out of there about 10 o'clock.
And the playwright is always on hand?
Not always. We can lead a horse to water. And some of them just can't make it for logistical reasons, but most of them do. Out of these 11, I would expect 2/3 to show up. Some playwrights, for whatever reason, don't. If the play has been done a number of times, they might be done with it. They still submit it. If it's a newer play, it's more likely they're going to show up to see what's going on.
Yeah, and I would assume that it's pretty satisfying for them to see this play move from the page to the stage.
Well, it's even more than that, EJ, because what happens is if they're local, they can sit in on the rehearsals. I mean, that is a big part in the play development process. What you can discover between the lines is happening on that stage when it finally gets up on its feet. And for those who just can't logistically come over for rehearsal, they can Zoom or Facebook in.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the great thing that's come out of some of the technology we have now. That playwright can be present and interact with the cast and director, and then save the trip for the actual performances.
Yeah, and you've talked about the workshop component and how important that is to you as a playwright and to these other emerging playwrights. And, we've touched on the subject of criticism before, and critical journalism, and writing about the plays you've seen in the form of reviews and whatnot. And this can be kind of a fraught topic because there are folks who are not necessarily going to want that conversation out in the open. It's like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But you as a playwright really value that feedback when it's done well, no?
Well,
the key,
how do you define done well?
Yeah, the key being done well.
You might get just crucified in a play, and it might have been done well, and maybe the critic is dead right. This was a swing and a miss, and that may be the end of that play. Or if it's constructive in its criticism, and the critic knows what they're doing, they can ask you to look at some things that you either overlooked or ignored. I mean, that's the thing about in theater. There's no place to hide. Yeah, you're right there with the audience. I always sat behind the audience. I still do, from a vantage point, so that, first of all, I feel too self-conscious in the midst, and I don't want people knowing I'm the playwright. If at all possible, that's not very possible at the Civic, but I think the more anonymous you can be, the more open you will be to criticism, and you won't worry about what people will think of you. But I think critics who know what they're doing can really help a playwright in the early stages of the process. I mean, some criticism, the play is long done, and it's generally more for the benefit of the public.
Right, and you're assessing that production of that particular play.
But early in the game, that criticism serves a very valuable purpose for the playwright. And you've got to take the good with the bad, and be willing to still love doing what you do and not worry about, well, am I going to please all the critics? You're probably not going to please all the critics. I mean, the books are full of plays that seemingly were absolute flops, which ultimately became classics. So. So I mean, all of this is by way of saying, and we were saying this off mic, is we don't have any critics in this town. It's a shame that we don't have anyone, and I think partly it's financial. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to write dramatic criticism, I think, and you're not going to make a living at it in this town. So I would encourage academics, retired persons to look at, for the love of the game, helping build back up a body of criticism for local works. And that's not just for playwrights, that's for performances too. I mean, directors, actors, we all need to be held under the microscope. That's why we do this. If we truly love it, and it's not just an act of vanity, if we're trying to do something authentic and truthful, we need people to hold our feet to the fire.
Yeah, and that was one of our takeaways during the early conversation, and I was so glad that you shared your experience with your first play, which was Dumb Luck, and you recognized its flaws, but there was a critic, and his name escapes me.
Oh,
but I bet you remember. And
Glenn was his first name, and he was the AP critic in New York. I'll remember his name, and he just took me apart, and then we had coffee at the Sea Galley the next day with the executive director of the theater and the director, and he was a very nice fellow. But I needed to go through that, and I kept at it.
And you kept working on Dumb Luck too, no?
I did, and ultimately it was published. It's not done very often, but the publisher, one of the editors for the publishing house that had come out and seen it at the Civic's request, stayed with me and hung with me, and over the next year it was rewritten. So, and that, plays have it's a long game for the most part. I mean, they say Noel Coward wrote Private Lives in 4 days and never changed a word. I don't believe it. And if he did it, that's very extraordinary. Most playwrights I know would agree with the old bromide that plays are never really finished, they're just abandoned.
Yeah, and they exist in a certain stasis from that point on.
Plays, there's multiple versions of even. So.
Yeah, well, even Shakespeare
yes.
Is still undergoing. With every single production is undergoing revision because people decide to omit stuff or rearrange. And so, yeah, it's still a living document to some extent.
By the way, what you're doing here is also part of the collaborative process. Just getting the word out, hopefully building enthusiasm, making people more aware of what's going on in their community. I think this is a great service too. And at least in the print media, I mean, I'm stuck in the 20th century. I don't do social media. And I know everybody relies on that now to get the word out. And consequently, you don't see much in the papers, in the print media. So this podcasts and social media is where it's at. And I'm glad that you're doing this, and we're interested enough to call Troy in and me in, and so there's others who can speak better than I can, because I think what's happened, I'm 77 and I'm slowly backing away. I'm not in the mix in the way I was 30, 40 years ago. So I'm not the best exponent for everything that's going on in Spokane. There are people who've taken my place, and it's up to you to find them and introduce them to the community, and I'm glad you're doing that. I'm glad you asked me what I thought still, because I do think history is important.
Yeah, and I'm a strong believer in the conversation that's around any work of art, whether that's visual art, whether that's a play. And I think I have strong opinions about the need for criticism and criticism done well. Criticism that's consistently negative, criticism that's consistently positive. I'm talking about more of an analytical criticism that maybe has a mix of both.
Right.
And that's maybe informed by, in the case of theater, informed by a long history of attending plays and having seen multiple productions of the same play and being able to put that into context, and then maybe help the audience as well as the cast and crew process what they've just seen, what they've just put on. And I feel like that conversation is so essential to an appreciation of what's taking place culturally.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. And actually, it's so daunting, though, in theater, because theater is so collaborative. There are so many moving parts that the play might have just been undermined by bad casting of one principal role, or a director who had an idea that just didn't really interface well with the ideas the playwright was dealing with. So it can be the set, it can be the pace, it can be the acting, it can be the writing, and for someone to have the wherewithal to look at all those different components and try to help figure out what worked or didn't work as they all come together in this incredible collaborative process. That's a tall order. It just is. And so there aren't that many people that we can trust to do that with integrity and the kind of knowledge that, as you mentioned, you need.
But I think
commentary.
Yeah, and I think criticism is an art, and this podcast takes its name from a quote that is attributed to Gustav Klimt, which is, "Art is a line around your thoughts." And I thought, that is so applicable to any art form, whether you're talking a play that you've just seen, whether you're talking a film or a television show or visual art, whatever it happens to be. That work of art, when it's done right, can help draw a line and help around very nebulous thoughts and help them coalesce into something a little more solid that's more comprehensible. And I feel like the conversation that exists, in part because of criticism, can help draw a line around your thoughts when it comes to processing, again, what you've just seen and making sense of it. Did I enjoy that? I left that feeling a little ambivalent. I left that feeling, and I'm not sure if it was the production. I'm not sure if it was the play itself. I'm not sure, where I won't necessarily say fault lies, but in trying to make sense of what you've just seen. And so for criticism, again, when done well, and when it exists as an art, can help draw a line around those nebulous thoughts and help them coalesce.
And by the way, this is equally crucial for directors. I do believe that plays do happen between the lines. We could just look at the play as a piece of literature and assess it, but it's when it's up on its feet and it's breathing that subtext can come in, and a no can mean a yes. It's all so subtle, and it takes an astute person and someone totally given over to the process to assess that. Directors, especially new directors, they need that kind of insight and follow-up. And then they get it internally from the staff of a theater or other directors or at the bar afterwards, but they also need it in a more formal way under game conditions when somebody is willing to say, I'm going to tell you what I think and try to be honest about it and give you something to think about. And sometimes, really, it can, depending on the stakes and what kind of availability there is, sometimes there are instances where the play will just all of a sudden, it'll change. There'll be rewrites, there'll be reblocking to try to solve some problems that somebody has identified that hadn't been dealt with. And that is partly why plays are such a dynamic, breathing thing, and why they open in New Haven and don't go to Broadway until they're well through the process and have endured.
And that's also the beauty of live theater and why I'm a little partial to it, or just live performance in general, because every performance on any given night is a unique snowflake, and things are going to change ever so subtly, even in response to the audience, night after night. And so to me, that lack of uniformity and those minor inconsistencies are what makes for the beauty of live performance.
Yeah. Totally agree.
So we're going to close now, but what we've been doing is a lightning round of questions to close.
Okay.
And so the first question is usually an either or question, and I've tailored this one specifically for you. So in past interviews, they've had to do with, say, sunshine or rain or something like that. But this is for you. This is holding on or letting go.
Holding on.
Do you want to contextualize that a little bit? Why is holding on
because it's such a natural thing for people to do. We don't like change. We don't like mortality. We're going to try to live with our illusions as long as we can. And so for people who finally let go, it's a little late. Either they've done their good work and they're able to let go, or frankly, they just lost control. But learning how to hold on and live authentically, I think, is tough work. So to me, holding on is more interesting. It's also more dangerous because it can be irrational. It can be unsupported. It can be the Alamo, where you're not going to wave the flag, but you're going to die, Yeah. So I would tend to go with holding on. More interesting.
A play that you wish you wrote.
Quite a few. I like, it's not done very often, but I like that championship season. We're such a competitive country, and it's about a basketball team that won a state championship, and it's ultimately revealed that the coach had put his thumb on the scale, and there had been some skullduggery in getting that championship, and there was a lot of pain that was masked. I think competition brings the worst out in us as human beings, and so I'm attracted to that kind of story.
Yeah, and you do like your sporting plays, given that you've got national pastime under your belt.
Yeah, that was a different idea, and Jason Miller wrote that championship season, and I wish I'd written that play. I'm not sure I would have done it any differently. I thought he got down to the bedrock of ultimately what seemed to be something to celebrate had been a corruption.
Now, you came out to Spokane initially to study law.
Right. Well, no, I went to undergrad at Gonzaga first.
Oh, okay, and from there went on to law. But what was your very first job? I can see you as a paper boy.
I was a stocker in Southern California at a long defunct company along the lines of Kmart called Akron, and I stocked shelves in high school. And then I don't think I did anything until I bucked bales in Tico, Washington, 2 summers from my uncle, which is where I really grew up.
And did you derive anything from those experiences that you then used in plays or any human interaction?
I love nature. It made me just appreciate the world, and it was so new. The farming community, small town life. I'd grown up in a suburb out of LA, and this was really a whole new experience. And I was by myself in the wilderness.
Yeah, that's always nice, the solitude.
Yeah.
And then finally, a thing that you would like to change about one of your plays. Is there one of your plays you wish you could revisit and do a little bit differently? Or even a line that you think, yeah, I would love to change that?
Nothing comes to mind. I'm kind of known for beating my plays to death and then stepping back and moving on. So there's nothing that wakes me up. I mean, it's probably a play that was just poorly written that I'd like to change. Some of my early stuff, where it seems trite now. So I'd like to change the name on the title to somebody else. Somebody's going to dig. I mean, if they're really hard up for things to do, they're going to dig up some of my early stuff and say, boy, is this a piece of...
Well, that's where you cut your teeth and, lesson to all aspiring playwrights, write under a nom de plume until you hit it big.
Or just don't look back. I mean, I think you borrow from what you've written before, but if you're growing at all, you're doing better. When I see a play of mine that's got a few years, I don't enjoy it as much. But I love the process of writing a play and developing the play and rehearsing the play. When it's finally on stage, that's when I can just kind of say, okay, now I still send it out, wanting, if I'm proud enough of it, wanting other productions of it or to get it published, but I'm done with it.
Yeah, and you abandoning it, but in a healthy way.
I think it's healthy. I mean, if I obsessed on it, that's the hardest thing about writing. I think you have to just do it, and then do it as best you can, and then move on.
And there we get to letting go.
Yeah, it is letting go. Yeah.
Great. Bryan, thank you so much for coming in today. It's
Hey,
hugely
it's great.
appreciated.
Well,
and I've been
I'm
wanting
glad
to do
be
this
back
for such
here.
a long time.
You're fun to talk to, even with a microphone in front of me.
And
You try to be honest about things.